Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share scary urban legends horror stories. First story, the legend of Long-Legged Larry. It was my cousin Bill who first told me about the legend of Long-Legged Larry. Bill and I used to be best friends, and I always spent the long, hot weeks of summer in his small town in the middle of nowhere. In 2002, however, things changed. I guess that's puberty for you. While I turned into a shy, reclusive nerd, Bill wanted to be known to be one of the cool kids. It didn't take me long to notice how much he'd changed. His entire demeanor was different, the way he carried himself, and even how he spoke. I could also tell he wasn't too happy to have that little nerd around, as he referred to me to his so-called friends, the cool kids he was so desperate to impress. Whenever we met them, he'd make fun of me, and before long, I became the butt of their collective jokes. Even worse, Bill began treating me like I was an idiot and never lost a chance to belittle me. It was one of these friends, I later learned, who'd told Bill about the supposed urban legend. "What's a long-legged Larry?" I asked what he told me about it. Instead of answering me, Bill scoffed and made it an effort to let me know how dumb I was for not knowing. "How can you not know about it? God, you're so stupid. I bet you just heard it from one of your friends," I retorted. This landed me one of his trademark thigh knocks. I cursed in pain and hobbled over to the couch in his room. While I rubbed what I knew to become a heavy bruise, he reiterated the story he'd heard. Nobody knows his real name, but he's a serial killer who escaped from a nearby mental institution. Bill started, his voice nothing but a conspiratorial whisper. "He's a mutant with long, spidery legs who was abandoned at birth. They say he grew up in the woods around town, but one night he came back and hunted down his entire family. He beat them all to death with his long legs. They say he's more a spider than a man, 8 feet tall and dash. This is so freaking dumb," I mumbled to myself as I listened. "Oh yeah? You just got no clue, that's all." "Yeah, sure," I thought, but kept my mouth shut. I'd hoped that was it, that this silly legend was nothing but another story to annoy me with and to act out the superiority he felt over me. Yet Bill was desperate to prove himself to his new friends. He probably thought he could be accepted into their little clique if he could prove there was more to Long-Legged Larry. At first, he'd merely talk about it, but soon enough, he dragged me along and made me help him with his research, as he called it. Day after day, I was forced to trudge after him as he went through town, asking people if they'd heard about the legend. Most people, of course, had never heard about it, and I thought it was nothing but bullshit, an elaborate joke Bill's friends had played on him. Occasionally, though, faces lit up in recognition, and slowly, ever so slowly, we learned more bits and pieces of the legend. An old drunk told us that Long-Legged Larry had once been the main attraction of a freak show or curiosity cabinet, but escaped and now roamed the wilderness around town. A scruffy-looking young man at the town's internet cafe told us he was the result of a failed government experiment. There were as many takes on the story as there were people who'd heard about it. They ranged from ancient horrors to athletes having turned into serial killers. Yet they all agreed on one thing. His legs were special, either too long, too strong, or, in one case, he had too many of them. One day, Bill struck gold. Once again, we were at the town's internet cafe. While I was browsing what could barely be called the internet, reading up on games, Bill was busy doing research. "That's it," he suddenly exclaimed from the seat next to me. I looked over at him, eyebrows raised, and a second later, he pulled me off my seat and in front of a screen. It was an old news story from the late 60s or early 70s. A group of teenagers had gone out into the woods to have some fun, and only one of them returned. He was out of it when police found him and said he and his friends had been hunted down by something out in the woods. I turned back to Bill, but he gave me an annoyed expression, urging me to read on. With a sigh, I turned back and continued reading the article, not sure what the big deal was. When they questioned the teen, he eventually admitted they'd gone out to the old steel mill. When the police checked the place, they found nothing. Not a hint of wild animals, serial killers, or whatever the young man claimed he'd seen. Yet they also found none of the bodies. So, I asked, turning back to Bill, "What do you mean, so? Did you read it? He's got to be out there. I should have known he's hiding out by the old steel mill with all the talk about it. And whatnot. What do you dash?" "Oh no, don't tell me." Bill's expression, however, had already changed. "We're so going," he brought out in an overly excited voice that made what few other patrons were at the place look up. "Oh, come on, Bill. I'm not going to some stupid abandoned place in the middle of dash." I was cut off by another thigh knock. "Why are you always such a? This is going to be awesome. Who knows? Maybe we'll even find out what happened to those teenagers that went missing." That was 30 years ago. Even if someone was out there back then, he's probably long gone, dead, or even dash. You know, if you don't come along, I'll tell everyone you're in love with Susan Kingsley. Who's Susan Kingsley? I could see the anger and frustration on Bill's face. For a moment, he opened his mouth, but then closed it again. "You know what? Fine, whatever." With that, he stormed off. Once more, I'd hoped this settled the issue, but Bill wasn't one to give up easily. No, things always went his way, even if he had to make sure they did. For days, he annoyed the hell out of me, even more so than before. He started making these strange spider noises, kicked me with his legs, and even tried to scare me in the middle of the night, pretending to be Long-Legged Larry. Eventually, I had enough. You know what, fine. Let's check the damn place out. Only an hour later, we were on our way, riding our bikes through town and then deep into the forest around it. We could already see the first signs of the old steel mill from afar. Its giant, derelict chimneys rose high above even the tallest trees, a testament to the town's long-forgotten industrial origins. Once we got closer, however, we saw that the once imposing building was now nothing but an overgrown ruin that had long since been reclaimed by nature. The only thing not in sheer and utter disrepair was the huge steel fence surrounding the building, sprouting a variety of "do not enter" and "parents are liable for their children's" signs. "How long you think this place has been abandoned?" I asked as we pushed our bikes into the nearby underbrush. "You really know nothing, do you?" he started, letting out an over-exaggerated sigh and rolling his eyes. "It was closed down in 1946 after the end of World War II. I heard they did experiments in there, created some sort of new weapon to fight the Nazis, but then I didn't bother to listen anymore." This was another story he'd heard from one of his friends, or it was something he'd made up on the fly, hoping to impress me. Still off limits. Even animals avoid the place, and some years ago, Jerry told me a squatter went missing out here. I heard the familiar rustling of the trees in the wind, but all other sounds had vanished. No birds, no skittering animals, nothing. It seemed, for once, at least part of what Bill had said was the truth. For a moment, I couldn't help but be creeped out. It was a warm summer day, but I still shivered. What if there really is someone hiding in there? I finally asked, "You know, there's one thing I've not told you about Long-Legged Larry. He likes nothing more than to eat dumb little nerds, so dash." "Shut up, Bill. It's not funny," I mumbled. "I mean, don't you think something's wrong with the place?" When I said this, Bill gave me a cheeky grin. "Well, in case there is, I brought this along." With that, he pulled out one of his dad's hunting knives. "If Larry tries to get me, I'm going to stab him with this." As if to prove he was serious, he waved the knife around in front of my face and even made a few swift stabbing motions in the air. I opened my mouth to tell him how goddamn stupid he was, but Bill had already turned around and made his way towards the steel fence. Either way, let's find out if someone's in there. With that, he began climbing the fence, ignoring all the signs fastened to it. A few moments later, he'd made it inside. "Come on already, you pussy." For a few seconds, I just stood there. Once more I listened, hoping desperately to hear any signs of life, but all was quiet. For a moment, I told myself to stay where I was. Hell, I told myself to just get out of here and leave Bill to his own devices. Then I sighed and approached the fence as well. Somehow I knew this idiot would get himself hurt if I wasn't around. If that happened, I'd be in a lot of trouble if I just left. Damn it. I cursed and climbed the fence. When I'd made it, Bill had already hurried to the entrance of the old steel mill. I'd only taken a few steps before I stopped again. I watched as Bill pulled open the heavy gate. A cavernous maw opened up in front of him, one that seemed to devour all light in the area. For a moment, I half expected a multitude of twisted arms or even legs to appear and snag him away right in front of me. Instead of that, however, Bill bent over and picked something up he'd found lying on the ground right behind the heavy gates. When I reached him, I saw he was holding up a page of an old, torn newspaper. See, I told you someone's in here. This place has been closed down since forever, but look at the year, look at it. A quick glance at the page told me it was from the year 1999, a mere 3 years ago. Bill, I think we should leave. We don't know. My voice trailed off. Bill didn't even listen to me anymore. Instead, he tore open his backpack, rummaged through the contents for a moment before he produced a flashlight. A moment later, he ventured inside. As I followed him, I realized once more how quiet it was. No birds, no animals, and not even the sounds of the rustling trees reached us in here. All we heard was the sound of our echoing footsteps on the old, cracked concrete floor. The inside of the steel mill was entirely empty and must have been stripped bare before it was abandoned. It made the place even bigger than it seemed from the outside. It was nothing but endless darkness, stretching on impossibly far in all directions. The only things I saw were a few lonely beams holding up the high roof above us, and the occasional heap of rubble. As Bill walked on, the beam of his flashlight jerked around wildly, darting here and there in seemingly uncontrolled motions. At first, I thought he was scared, but then I saw his face. He was giddy with excitement. If we find him, it's going to be the most amazing story ever. Then the flashlight's beam hit something on the concrete floor, something that had once been very much alive. A gasp escaped mouth, and I barely contained the scream that had tried to escape my throat. Bill, however, was already hurrying over to the bloodied remains in front of us. "It's a fox, but it looks like it's been dead for a while," he said, poking it with his foot. "Yeah, but how did it end up in here? There are no other animals around, and look, it's been torn apart." "Probably Larry," Bill mumbled. "Shut up. This is getting creepy. Please, Bill, let's just leave, all right. You're such a pussy. But fine, if you want to be a baby, you can wait for me outside." This time, I'd had it with his stupidity. This place was creepy enough, but this fox. Something was wrong here, and the last thing I wanted was to run into some deranged homeless dude or squatter, or hell, even stupid Larry himself. As fast as my steps could lead me, I made my way towards the small spot of sunlight we'd entered from. Suddenly, I tripped over something. I cursed, trying to kick away what I thought was nothing but rubble. But when I looked down, I saw it was a heap of clothes, torn apart, half-rotten clothes. Yet what my food had hit was a bone, a long, big bone that was clearly not from a fox or another small animal. Then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something else between the torn clothes on the floor. It was the remains of a broken human skull. This time, I could do nothing about the scream that escaped mouth. I backed away, stumbled over my feet, and crashed to the ground. Bill was with me a few moments later, his face a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "What happened? What did you see? Did you get scared by Dash?" The moment he saw what I was pointing at, he was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "He's a cannibal. Before I could tell him we had to get out of here, I heard it. Footsteps. Hard, fast footsteps that echoed towards us from somewhere inside the building. When I turned to look at Bill, he was as scared as I was. All the excitement had left his face as the reality of the situation finally dawned on him. The beam of his flashlight darted around erratically, trying desperately to find whoever was coming for us. And we both saw it. A disheveled, older man came dashing right for us. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" he called out to us. We both screamed in terror. Bill was already running, and a moment later, I'd made it to my feet and was right behind him. In his senseless panic, Bill wasn't running towards the exit, but deeper into the building, away from the creepy guy who was about to murder us. "Come back here. Damn it. Gonna get you." I heard his voice from behind us. We ran as fast as we could, but with each step, the man was closing the distance between us. And then, just before the man reached us, Bill stared right at me. His eyes were wide. All the color had drained from his face, but then a different emotion washed over it. It was guilt, and before I understood what was happening, he tripped me. As Bill ran on, I stumbled, desperately trying to keep my balance, but after only a few steps, I crashed to the floor. For a moment, everything stopped. I stared after Bill, who was still running, continuing on deeper into the darkness of the steel mill, his flashlight beam dancing across the floor. Then I turned around. My eyes focused on the man who was coming for me, on Larry, and I knew it was too late. He had reached me, and before I could even get back to my feet, his hands closed around my arm. I screamed after Bill, screamed for him to come back and help me, but he just ran on. I kicked at Larry, tried to fight myself free, but it was futile. In a few swift motions, he restrained me, and a moment later, he pushed a hand over my mouth, cutting off my screams forever. "Not another damned word," he snapped at me. Then he dragged me back towards one of the huge beams in the empty hall. As he held me in place, he said something else. It was nothing but a whisper. "Quiet, it will hear you two." I didn't understand what was going on. What was he talking about? Once more, I renewed my efforts to get free, but then I heard it. Sounds different from Bill's echoing footsteps. The sounds were unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The closest I could think of was bugs, a multitude of skittering bugs. Then Bill screamed. This time, his scream was different. It was nothing but an unintelligible, blood-curdling wail. It was cut short a second later, but its echo traveled endlessly and lingered in the empty halls of the steel mill. All the while, the man I'd thought to be Larry held me in place, still covering my mouth. Then something hit the floor, something wet and made of flesh and bone, something I knew had been my Casimir moments ago. I heard clothes being torn, flesh being ripped apart, and then a sound so disgusting, I almost vomited. It reminded me of someone sucking the juices from a fruit. The sounds continued for almost a minute before silence returned to the steel mill. All I could hear now was beating of my heart and the labored breathing of the man holding me in place. Then, the skittering returned, and for the blink of an eye, something was illuminated by the flashlight Bill had dropped. It was a tall, bony figure, a figure so tall it almost reached the hall's high roof. And as it moved, I saw a multitude of thin, spidery limbs. No, not limbs, I realized. Legs skittering over the floor as whatever this abomination was dragged itself back to its hiding place. For long minutes, the man kept holding me in place, not moving. His eyes focused on the lonely flashlight beam as he listened to the deafening silence all around us. As he did, I could see the terror on his face. Eventually, though, he opened his mouth again. All he said was a single, whispered word. "Outside." With that, he dragged me from the dark hall and back into daylight. Eventually, he let me go, and I'd have run if I'd had the energy left. I stumbled only a few steps before I collapsed on the ground, a trembling, crying mess. What the hell was that? Was it long-legged Larry? Long-legged, what? Is that what they call it these days? What are you? My voice trailed off, not even sure what I was going to ask. "That thing in there," the man finally said. "Whatever it is, it's been around forever, even before I was born. There's always been stories about it, and it's probably the reason they shut down this damned mill all those years ago. But what is it? Some sort of freak or serial killer?" For a moment, the man was quiet. His eyes wandered over the old steel mill in front of us before he shook his head. "Got no clue what it is myself. Might be something that escaped from God knows where, like some stories say. Might be something much older. All I can say is that it's not human. Knew it the moment I first saw it." "First saw it? What do you dash?" Came here years ago with my friends when I was still a teenager. Got drunk and high one night with my friends and wanted to figure out if there was more to the stories. God, how dumb we were. Not that we expected to find anything, but then that thing. He was quiet again, shaking his head. For a moment, his body tensed up, and I saw the guilt on his face. Was the one who led us here, and the only one who made it out, the only one fast enough to get away. When I heard it, it hit me. The news story Bill had found about the group of teenagers who went here long ago, and who all went missing except the one who got away, the one from the old newspaper article. He gave me a surprised look before he nodded. But then, why is the thing still here? Why didn't they do anything about this whatever this thing is? You know, boy, most people in town don't believe those dumb old stories. No one's going to believe some teenager high on drugs, talking about some spider monster that took his friends away. No, they thought I'd snapped and did God knows what to them, or that they simple ran off. Put me in the bin for a few years, but eventually let me go. Found nothing out here, no hint of what happened, and no hint of my friends. But if this thing dash, it's a small town, boy. No one cares. People go missing in the woods, and that's it. But if you know what's in there, why are you here? Why'd you come back? As I asked this, I saw how he balled his fists and saw the look of frustration that came over his face. Been watching this place for a good 10 years now, and put up all those things to make sure. When I saw your bikes, I knew you'd make the same mistake I'd made all those years ago. Then I heard you screaming and knew it would come to get you. Tried my best to get you both out, but instead of continuing, he just shook his head, cursing to himself. After Bill's disappearance, an investigation was started. I told them what I'd seen, what had happened, but no one believed me when I talked about Long-Legged Larry. When they eventually checked out the old steel mill, it was a half-hearted effort, and of course they found nothing. All signs of habitation and all the remains we'd discovered were long gone. And Bill should stay missing. Just another person who'd went missing in the woods. All this happened over 3 decades ago. The old man who'd saved me that day, Jonathan, is long dead. Even now, even to this day, the rumors of Long-Legged Larry or Sneaky Spidery Steve, or whatever they call it now, persists and is shared by the teenagers in town. While most regard it as nothing but an urban legend, as bullshit, so to speak, there are always those just like Bill. The ones who think there's more to be found out here. They think they'll be famous, they'll come back as heroes, and can upload their discoveries on YouTube or TikTok. And so, I'll make sure to keep watch, just as old Jonathan did before me. Whenever I hear those rumors, those stories, I say it's nothing but humbug, and there's nothing to be found at the old steel mill. Yet I've got to keep watch. Not because this thing might get out. I know it doesn't want to. No, I've got to keep watch for those dumb enough to come here, dumb enough to believe in the stories, such as the legend of Long-Legged Larry. Second story, The Whispering Man. As a child, I was fascinated by urban legends. Each and every one of them is a snapshot of the culture of an area, and these outrageous stories are told for one of several reasons. They can be based on a true story. The babysitter and the man upstairs was based off of a murder in the 1950s and was widely spread during the 60s. They can be told to showcase the culture in an area. The couple who eats KFC because the wife is tired, which turns out to be Kentucky Fried Rat, is a story told to punish women who shirk their so-called womanly duties by joining the workforce instead of homesteading. They can be told to scare children into behaving correctly and listening to their parents. As the grandchildren of Eastern European immigrants, my brother and I were terrified of the Black Volga, a black car that kidnapped and murdered children who talked to strangers. These stories can encompass and consume entire countries and cultures, large swaths of the world, all telling the same anecdotes around campfires. Children all cowering in fear as similar tales are regaled. Growing up on the South Shore of Massachusetts, there was the Whispering Man. The Whispering Man was a story that I had first heard from my uncle. It was the summer before I started kindergarten, prime time for scaring a child into behaving well. My mother had brought us out camping by a lake in New Hampshire with her brother and his family for Labor Day weekend, sending off the summer with a last hurrah. The first few hours were spent by the adults setting up the campsite, while my cousin and I were tasked with gathering firewood and kindling. My younger brother was excluded from our expedition due to him being deemed too young to join us. My cousin and I wandered the forest around the campsite, finding sticks and twigs that we used to battle one another in a mock Star Wars-style lightsaber duel, before ultimately putting them into a basket to bring back to our campsite. Our laughs and giggles echoed throughout the forest, ultimately letting our parents know that we were safe and sound. Living in the suburbs, I had become accustomed to buildings lining the streets, small shops, and strip malls scattered about main roads. Plant life, such as trees and grass, only belonged in the front and backyards of houses on side streets. I was enamored by the forest, the way the trees stood sturdy and strong. The grass was overgrown, untouched by tools like lawnmowers and weed whackers. I could have never imagined the sun could be entirely blocked out by the natural parasol that the leaves from the trees provided. And yet, there was infinite shade. During our journey, my older cousin, Ivan, asked me if I knew about the Black Volga. I nodded, as it seemed our grandmother educated all of her grandchildren about the dangers of strangers in strange cars. Babuzha made that up, you know? Nah, I responded. She wouldn't lie to us. Why would she make that up? That way we don't talk to strangers. Think about it. She never talks about anybody that she knows who got taken by one. And do you even know what a Volga is? I've never seen one. As easily swayed as my child mind was, I started to put stock in what my cousin said. Do you want to hear a real scary story? Fear and excitement danced in my eyes before a small wave of apprehension washed over me. How do I know that it's real? If Babuzha tells a fake story, then why would you tell a real one? Because my dad will tell it, and he says that he actually knows someone who it happened to. Later that night, we gathered around the campfire where Ivan and I were able to enjoy the fruits of our labor. The sun had set hours before, leaving our campsite illuminated solely by our fire and the stars above us, untouched by light pollution. I caught myself staring into the sky, craning my neck, allowing myself to feast my eyes on the stars that dotted the heavens above me. If you stay like that, your neck will get stuck, and you'll look like that forever, my mother warned, sitting beside me. My brother was fast asleep in her arms, leaving myself, my mother, uncle, and cousin sitting around the campfire, wide awake and enjoying the nature that engulfed us. The darkness of the night crept towards us as the fire ran low on fuel, suffocating as it ate away at the logs, sticks, and twigs I had so diligently gathered. The warmth it provided waned as the chilling wind from the trees forced itself onto my back, causing the muscles to convulse as I shivered. In this moment, my cousin looked at his father. "Dad, tell the story about the Whispering Man." My mother cocked her head and spoke to her brother in a language I didn't understand. Despite her best efforts, I never quite picked up the language passed down to her by her mother. My uncle responded in the same language, leaving Ivan and I completely out of the loop. My mother smiled and urged her brother to indulge his son's request. "Go on, Kolya, tell the story." My uncle smiled and nodded. When Ludmilla and I were little, we grew up near a small patch of woods that was in our friend's backyard. His name was Travis. The trees in the woods weren't nearly as big as the trees here. He gestured all around us, pointing towards the still giants that loomed over us. The trees there stuck out of the ground like fingers that were ready to grab you at any moment. He grabbed onto his son, who sat next to him. Ivan nearly jumped out of his skin. Ludmilla, Travis, and I all played in the woods together often enough. We even made a small fort one year. It took us the entire summer. One day we stayed out too long playing in the forest. It was dark out, and the three of us were playing around the fort, deep in the woods. Suddenly the crickets stopped chirping, and the wind stopped blowing, and we heard a voice. A child's voice. "Come play with me," it said. Ludmilla and I were terrified. We ran out of the fort, and we ran home as fast as we could, but when we came out of the woods, Travis wasn't with us. My uncle bowed his head and sighed before continuing. "The voice we heard in the woods at night was that of an evil in this world, the Whispering Man. He walks around the woods at night, looking for children to play with him. He draws them in and tricks them, inviting them to play. My shivering persisted. No longer was it motivated by a change in temperature. Instead, the rapid muscle contractions were fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. I spoke up, a frail voice that shattered against the progressively chilling air. Where was Travis? He was with the Whispering Man. We never saw him again, aside from the missing posters that were put on all the telephone poles in our neighborhood. He paused for a while. The chirping of the crickets and the crackling of the dying fire were the only sounds emanating from the forest. If you boys ever hear voices from the forest, you don't follow them, understood? Ivan and I emphatically nodded in agreement, and my uncle poured his water over the fire, finally putting it out of its misery. A plume of gray smoke was released from the blackened logs and twigs. Its dying breath wafted into the air before dissipating into the sky above. That night, I spent the majority of the time listening as the wind gently swayed the branches of the trees. The leaves whistled almost as if they were trying their hardest to speak, but their own anatomy simply wouldn't allow it. My eyes were forced open by my overactive imagination. As I watched the faint shadows waltz against the tent, I could have sworn that some of them shifted and morphed into the shape of a man. The chirping of the crickets, combined with the whipping of the wind, created unintelligible whispers in the night, whispers that I feared belonged to the Whispering Man. I cowered in fear, allowing the sea of horror that had been built up inside of me to thrash me around. My head spun. The Whispering Man isn't real, I thought. Play with me. The voice penetrated through the thin plastic that acted as my sole line of defense. I retreated into a ball, deep in my sleeping bag, keeping one eye fixed on the zipper that acted as the only point of entry. There against the plastic, I saw a hand reach down towards the zipper outside the tent. My heart raced. I held my breath for as long as my still-developing lungs would allow. And when they failed me, my breath became shallow and fleeting. The sound of the zipper forced itself into the tent, and the moonlight seeped into my tent. He isn't real. He isn't real. He isn't real. The thought repeated countless times. Reprieve washed over me as enough moonlight gave way to illuminate Ivan's face. He began to laugh, and he whispered, "Got you." Before I could respond, he quickly zipped the tent back up, encasing me in darkness, and he returned back to his tent. The years passed and gave way to several changes in life. My family had moved away from my early childhood home and into a small apartment after the housing crash in '08 caused us to lose the house after my mom was laid off and our house went into foreclosure. Luckily for myself and my brother, James, we were able to stay in the town that we grew up in. Although we lost the friends that we knew from our old neighborhood, James and I were given the opportunity to make new friends in our new home. Once we moved in, our new neighbors were quick to meet us and incorporate them into the fold that they had built over the course of a decade. And although we were new, they never thought of us as strangers. The kids in our new neighborhood, aside from James and our Michael, who was just about a year older than James, and Eddie, who was only a couple months older than me. Michael and Eddie had lived in this neighborhood their entire lives. They told us stories of the way things used to be before we arrived. Stories of massive games of manhunt before other kids moved away, and all the stupid things that they got up to. But those times were gone, and although they never said it, they were excited for the new memories that we would make together. Mere weeks after James and I had moved in, the four of us were inseparable. Anywhere one of us went, we all went together. Our parents called us the Four Musketeers. The summer before I entered high school, when I was 14 and James was 11, the four of us spent our days running around the neighborhood, finding roofs of different buildings that we could climb on and near our houses, having airsoft wars in the woods, swimming in a small above-ground pool in Eddie's backyard, and at night we'd gather around the fire pit in Michael's backyard. We'd eat s'mores, and it was there that I'd retell the urban legends and scary stories that had consumed my attention. One night, as we sat around the fire, James asked, "Okay, Paul, which story are you going to tell us this time?" I began running through the Rolodex in my head of each story I had read from my editions of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, High Beams. No, I told that one last week. The Hook? No, that was the other day. Where do you come from? No, I've already told that one 3 times. Then I remembered, the Whispering Man. I have a new one, I announced, beaming with pride. No way you have one that you haven't told us at least twice. Eddie scoffed while leaning back in his chair. I do, the Whispering Man. Each of them shared the same expression of puzzled intrigue. 3 kids who grew up in a neighborhood just like this one were playing in a small patch of woods behind one of their houses. Their parents always warned them to come home before dark, but one night they didn't listen. They stayed out in the woods, near a little fort that they had built themselves out of log sticks. The 3 of them were each telling scary stories to see who could tell the scariest, creepiest one. Suddenly, all the normal night-time noises were gone, as if all the bugs and animals vanished. Then, they heard a little girl's voice. Come play with me, it said. And 2 of the kids ran out of the woods. They ran as fast as they could, but when they came out, their friend wasn't with them. He was gone. He vanished out of thin air, just like the bugs and the animals. And to this day, nobody has seen him. Where did you get that lame-ass story? Laughter erupted out of the group, to include myself. Once we had finally composed ourselves after Eddie's comment, I managed a response. My uncle told my cousin and I the story when we went camping when I was like 5 or 6. According to him, the 3 kids in the story were him, my mom, and their friend Travis. I did some research, and turns out it's some local legend in the area that started after a whole bunch of kids went missing. One of the missing kids was named Travis. I think my uncle just threw his name in the story to make it seem like it was a true story. Well, I hope he told the story better than that. James chided. The subject of discussion quickly changed to the new airsoft pellets that Michael's dad had bought him for his birthday. We all gathered around them in fascination for one simple reason. They glowed in the dark. Once the fire had died out, and there was nothing but the dim streetlight that fought to illuminate the area with no assistance from the moon and the stars which were shrouded by the overcast sky above, we began to shoot the brand-new pellets in the backyard as random targets that we found about the yard. We stood around in awe as we saw the pellets rip through the air towards the targets. Michael, how many of these pellets do you have? James asked. My dad bought 2 jugs of 1,000 pellets. The 4 of us went silent, and although no words were spoken, we all knew the exact thoughts of the others, and at that point we simply waited for someone to blurt out the idea first. Airsoft war. Eddie asked the question as if it was rhetorical. Eddie never received an audible response from any of us, but our actions were all he needed. Immediately after he asked the question, James and I went into our shared bedroom and grabbed our airsoft guns and ran back outside and onto our side street and waited for Eddie and Michael. Although our mother was apprehensive about allowing us to have our airsoft guns, after enough begging and pleading, she bought us each a $20 gun. They were cheap, clear plastic handguns, and the plastic allowed for us to see the inner mechanisms that allowed us to shoot small plastic balls at each other. She did have 2 conditions in order for us to keep our guns. The first was that we never fire them in the house. The second was that we only use them during the day, so they couldn't be mistaken for a real pistol. While we waited for Eddie and Michael, James began to have some apprehensions about our expedition. What if Mom finds out that we were playing with our guns at night? She won't find out, dude. She's on the night shift. She won't be home until 1 in the morning. So long as we're back before then, we'll be fine. James was relieved, but only slightly. I could tell he was still nervous, regardless of my attempt to reassure him. His apprehensions vanished once Eddie and Michael met us outside of our house, and we made our way to the woods. About a 5-minute walk away from our neighborhood was a small cemetery that had been reclaimed by nature. The sands of time had eroded the headstands that were left standing to the point where very few names could be seen, and the names and dates that were legible had been long forgotten. Trees split and cracked several headstones. The grass was overgrown, and it sprawled out of the land it diligently took back from man. The chain-link fence that encased the cemetery had been completely taken over by oxidation, leaving the iron a sickly shade of brown. The cemetery itself was split in half by a dirt path in the valley between 2 small hills. It wasn't the large plot of land typical of cemeteries, but instead it was maybe a half-mile long and a quarter-mile wide. There were 2 entrances into the cemetery. One led to a main road, and the other led into the parking lot of a private school. We walked through the parking lot and into the cemetery and began to discuss the rules to our little war. One rule always stayed the same: no aiming for the head. This time we decided to play in teams. Michael and I were against James and Eddie. We each loaded our guns with the glow and the dark pellets, and James and Eddie began to count to 30, giving Michael and I a head start. As we began running away, I instructed Michael to go on to the opposite hill that I went to. That way, if either of them finds one of us, the other can try and take them out. He followed my instructions, and we were soon situated on the peaks of each individual hill, scanning the ground below for potential targets. I cocked my airsoft gun and kept my finger on the trigger as I scanned the area. Eddie and James had finished counting and were trying to hunt down me and Michael. I laid down in the tall grass. My eyes were peeled, but in the dark woods, I was lucky to see 15 feet in front of me. There was a dim light in the distance from the streetlights on the main road, but it was nowhere near strong enough to penetrate through the leaves from the trees. My ears quickly adapted to the silence. The chirps of the crickets and the sound of mosquitoes buzzing around me filled my ear canal and forcefully banged against my eardrums. I had to periodically slap different parts of my skin that the mosquitoes had buried themselves into in order to keep them off of me. Through the leaves of the trees, in the dying light of the street lamp, I saw a man walking down the sidewalk. I couldn't make out much, if any, details about his physical appearance. At first glance, the way he walked seemed normal, but the slight idiosyncrasies were uncanny. His gait was more akin to an uneven hobble, as if he was limping, but the limp seemed to shift from one leg to the other, like he couldn't decide which leg to bear the weight on. His arms didn't sway naturally, they stayed pinned to his side. I watched as he approached the tall, old, white picket fence gate with chipped paint, and it was there he stood completely still. It came in waves. The gentle breeze that gracefully walked across my back previously now stood at attention, and it seemed as though the air attempted to bring my body into the earth beneath me. The small animals that were moving around the tall grass all stood perfectly still, as if they were all suddenly taxidermized. The bugs and birds that were singing the song of the night all stopped in unison in an orchestrated silence. The deafening silence left a vacuum in my ears, and the only sound that I could hear was that of my own blood circulating through my ears as my pulse steadily increased. My eyes were fixed on that gate, and it felt like I was frozen in time. The silence was violently cut by painful shrieking of the gate into the cemetery as it was slowly peeled open. Slow-moving footsteps painfully forced themselves onto the dirt path below them. As they got closer, I was able to make out more of the unknown man's details. His skin was pale and clung onto the bones underneath them, and I couldn't find a single hair on his body. His nose was abnormally long, prominently protruding out from his face and coming to a knife's tip at the end. He was dressed in jeans and a pristine ironed long-sleeve button-up shirt. The sleeves were neatly rolled to his elbows, revealing his forearms. The skin on his arms was so tight that I could see the separation of the two bones in the forearms. He stood still, no less than 20 feet ahead of me. He tilted his head back ever so slightly and opened his mouth. "Hey, come over here, I found them." I never saw his lips move after he opened his mouth. It was like he had a speaker in the back of his throat that projected his message out into the air at a volume just above a whisper. "They're here, come here." The voice rang out once more into the dead air. On the second listen, I came to a realization that chilled my bones and sent goosebumps throughout my body. The voice coming out of the man's mouth was Eddie's. My breath was shallow. I could barely keep my arms up, as though they were crushed by their own weight. My hands were now plagued by tremors, and I was entirely unable to keep my gun steady. And from the corner of my eye, I saw James's silhouette lurking towards the man, towards the false version of Eddie's voice. I did the only thing I could think to do. I took aim and fired my airsoft gun at the man. I watched the luminescent green speck rip through the air, and it maintained a course straight for the man's head. The sound of the burst of air escaping my small plastic pistol rang out, bringing life back to the world around me. The pellet made contact with the man's head. He turned his head towards me, his cold, beady, black eyes cut through my own. I clamped my eyes shut, the vice of childlike logic of if I can't see it, it can't see me rapidly bounce around my brain. Footsteps rapidly pounded against the ground, bounding in my direction, and then I felt the unmistakable sting of a plastic pellet hitting my side. "I got Paul," James yelled out, beaming with pride. I opened my eyes. The man had vanished, and James was standing over me. Relief had reinvigorated my body, allowing strength to return to my legs. And as I stood, another burst of air sent another pellet ripping through the air and into James's chest. Another shot brought the silence of the cemetery to its knees, and I heard Eddie's voice boom across the small valley and into the night. Michael had won us the round. My apprehension towards staying in the cemetery grew insurmountably, and I urged the group to stop with our festivities. I lied and said that my mother had texted me, letting me know that she was getting off from work early. Luckily for me, they didn't call my bluff, and we all returned home. James and I went up to the small room that we shared. Our bedroom was 12 feet x 8 feet, with 2 windows that looked out onto the street from the second floor of our small apartment. We had bunk beds which were placed against the back wall. I got into the top bunk, and James got into the bottom bunk. Sleep didn't come easily that night. It repeatedly slipped from my grasp, like sand through a sieve. Once I finally found sleep, it was swiftly interrupted by the sound of intermittent and uneven tapping against glass. I sat upright and crawled my way to the end of my bed, toward the window. As I approached, I saw a small green speck bounce off the window. The glow in the dark airsoft pellet. I looked out the window, down onto the street, and there he was. The only thing that had changed about his appearance was that he now had a small welt on his right cheek. He walked towards where the pellet landed, picked it up, and threw it against my window once more. It banged against the window with a surreal amount of force. A small chip appeared in my window, and in the faint reflection that I forced my eyes to bring into focus, the chip in the window was against my cheek. My right cheek. I forced myself to the back of my bed, my head against my pillow. I attempted to burrow myself deep into my mattress, to no avail. The tapping continued for several minutes, before abruptly stopping. I heard the sound of tires against the rocky dirt outside my house. The flash of headlights flooded into the room. The car door opened and closed, and soon so did my front door. My mother was finally home, and I no longer had to rely on the faux safety of the blanket for protection. I finally found sleep. However, it was far from peaceful. My dreams were plagued by the man's presence. I repeatedly found him in my peripheral vision throughout my dreams. I dreamt that he followed me. He was around corners, behind doors, in the back of rooms that I was in. His mouth would open. "Come outside. Play with me." The list of voices in his arsenal weren't familiar to me, and for that I was thankful. He made promises, how I'd never be grounded. I'd never have to worry about rules, no curfew, and no punishments. If I close my eyes and allow myself a few brief moments of silence, I can still hear his final words to me. "I'll come back for you, Paul." The voice was warped and raspy, as if it was a new voice added to his collection that he was trying out for the first time. It was an attempt at James's voice. I woke up that morning in a cold sweat. My shirt was drenched, and it clung uncomfortably to my body. I jumped out from the top bunk to find my brother's bed empty and unmade. I walked out of my room and into my mother's. She was still dead asleep, recovering from the long night of work. I got to the top of the stairs to find the front door slightly ajar, the cool morning air spilling into the house. I walked down the stairs and closed it. I walked into the living room, empty, the kitchen empty, the bathroom empty. Panic set in. Where's James, I thought. I began to frantically check each of the 5 rooms in the house, causing enough noise to wake my mother up in the process. I ran next door to Michael's house and rapidly banged on the door as if I was a police officer about to start a raid. His mother answered the door in pajama pants and a bathrobe, still rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. She told me that James wasn't over there, and I should probably check Eddie's house before allowing panic to take hold. But it was too late. Panic already had its hand wrapped tightly around my throat. Every breath I took from then on was labored. I sprinted to Eddie's door, praying that James had simply ventured over there earlier than usual. I made a feeble attempt at collecting myself and banged on Eddie's door, much the same way I banged on Michael's. Eddie answered the door. A look of irritation smeared across his face. "Bro, do you know how early it dash? Is James here?" The words escaped my mouth at such a rapid pace that he had to pause to comprehend what I had said. "What? No, why would he dash? When was the last time you saw him?" I was hyperventilating now, panic's grasp growing tighter and tighter against my windpipe. "When you guys went home after the airsoft war." "What? He's not home, and he's not at Michael's either." Eddie's eyes widened. His facial expression shifted from irritation to confusion to panic all within an instant. He told me to run back home and see if James's phone was still there. Maybe he had gone somewhere without any of the rest of us, however unlikely that seemed. He said that he would get Michael out of bed and they'd start running around checking all the usual spots that we'd hang out. We promised to keep each other updated, and we split up to begin our search. I found James's phone on his bed in the mess of blankets and sheets that had been shifted around. His screensaver was a picture of the four of us, all together on the roof of a convenience store. We all looked so proud of ourselves. I opened his phone. No calls, no text messages, nothing that screamed, "Run away." I woke up my mother, and when I told her that I couldn't find James, she immediately sat up and sprung out of bed to begin her own search throughout the house, our backyard, and our neighborhood as a whole. Soon everyone, including Eddie's and Michael's parents, had organized a small search party. The police were called that morning. A swarm of cop cars descended upon our neighborhood. I answered a flurry of questions that night. At first, I was apprehensive about admitting that we played in the woods the night before, out of fear of reprisal and punishment from my mother. As I look back on it now, especially from the lens of a parent, that didn't matter. I told them about the man outside the window, but I didn't tell them about the different voices he used in an attempt to lure me out. I didn't say anything about his final words to me through the window. I didn't say anything about him using James's voice. Soon the entire town was buzzing with police officers passing out flyers with James's school picture from the year before. Hundreds upon hundreds of flyers were given out, but nothing ever came of it. The police told us that they had found a lead a couple of times in the first couple of months, but they dried up quickly. The sands of time eroded the hope I had of ever seeing my brother again. It's been nearly a decade since I last saw him. I'm honestly not sure what makes me angrier nowadays, the fact that I couldn't protect him, or the fact that I can't remember his face without seeing a picture. Some days I wish that I had just gone outside when I saw the man tossing the plastic pellet against my window. So it's here that I submit to you all another legend based on a horrifying truth, the Whispering Man. And to James, if you're still out there, and if you read this, please come home. I miss you. And although I never said it while you were here, I love you. Third story. I met the slit-mouthed woman. What is an urban legend? How are they formed? How do they persist? Legends from different times can be told 1,000 different ways, each telling reflecting the time they were formed, informed somehow by the world around them. I've lived in so many places over the years, and in every place I've heard the same whispered stories. How many variations have you heard of the story of the hook-handed killer stalking the couple on Lover's Lane? Every town has its own version with its own local flavor. Every town is different, and every town incorporates its own local fears into the legend. Sometimes it's not a hook-handed killer, but the Jersey Devil, a human, horse, bat hybrid of demonic origin. In Connecticut, Michigan, and Ohio, it's one of the Melonheads, one of a deformed gang of child insane asylum experiments. In Staten Island, it's Cropsey, the axe-wielding serial killer of the woods. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and it all ties back to something that happened to me a few months ago. The air was heavy with rain, and the skies had opened. I was in downtown Manhattan, late afternoon, on my way back home from work in Brooklyn. I worked as a background actor. Dead body on Law and Order. That's me. The back of my head, it's in succession. I had wrapped early and was on my way from one train station to the connecting path train station so I could continue my lengthy commute home to Jersey City. Between the two was about a 20-minute walk. It had been humid and overcast all day, but I had hoped in vain to beat the rain. Now, I was quickly becoming soaked in the style of someone trapped inside of a washing machine during a flood, so I ducked into the first bar my eyes caught onto. It was a smaller, dingy place, somewhere I felt like I had been before, but couldn't recall the exact details. It was somewhere in the vicinity of Greenwich Village, though even if I remembered the name of the place, I wouldn't tell you, and I would do my best not to seek it out again myself. Regardless, I went in because it was warm and a place to sit down away from the wind, rain, and steadily dropping temperatures. I hoped the rain would end quickly, but according to my weather app, one would have no such luck. Standing in the doorway, I put on my COVID face mask and ventured further inside. That was when I noticed her, sitting on a stool on the far end of the bar, dressed in a white dress and black overcoat. Her hair was long, straight, and black. It shined in the light. Her skin was as pale as porcelain, and a shadow fell over her eyes. She was older than me, maybe 10 or 15 years my senior, perhaps more, but she was oddly implacable. She could have told me she was any age, and I would have believed it. The bottom half of her face was hidden beneath a face mask. There was something about her where when her dark eyes turned towards me, everything else in the room grew dim except for her. Despite the darkness of the bar and further shadows of the corner she sat in, she had shine. I could see her clearly. When she gestured to me without a word, I came quickly to sit beside her. The bartender came, though I barely noticed through the shadows, and I ordered a drink. She felt like when you meet someone in a dream. Has that ever happened to you? They say that every face you see in a dream is someone you've seen in real life. I see actors a lot, but have you ever seen someone in a dream that you've never seen in real life before? That's what this felt like. I took my face mask off to drink my own drink. Hers stayed on. Fair enough. You can't be too careful these days. Fortunately, in the film industry, they test actors, even background actors, every morning of every workday, so I was fairly confident in my own health. I also knew that in Japan, masks were more commonplace before the pandemic than they were in the States. They were worn in cities with heavy smog and were worn every flu season by some, so I didn't think much of it. There was a sense of mystery to her. Her eyes were as black as the night sky, and I could sense no emotion in them. I didn't even know what she looked like under her mask. I began to talk to the woman, asking her about herself, her name, occupation, and up close she was even more striking than afar. Her skin was smooth without even a wrinkle, almost like plastic or a piece of carved marble. Her hair shined like how a spider's web reflected light. And her voice, it was rhythmic, never faltering in tone, almost hypnotic. The alcohol put me in a daze, loosening me. Everything became subtle movements, ripples on water, a sort of merging of thought and action. Everything merged and formed and unformed. She told me she was originally from Japan, Tokyo to be exact. She had worked as a fashion model and had been fairly popular, appearing in all sorts of magazine advertisements. She had come to America recently for a fresh start. When I asked what from, she was less forthcoming and quickly changed the subject. I told her a bit about myself, that I had lived in Japan for a time as a child, and I found as I talked to her that every location I mentioned, she knew. Different cities, even different islands at one point or another she had been there and could recall exact details. It was almost scary. Memories long forgotten of those places came flooding back, and I recalled a simpler, happier time. Back then, I didn't have to worry about anything real. I was a kid free to explore the world with the support of my parents to fall back on. Now, the world was colder, and I was on my own. I offered to buy her a drink. She told me she was all right, and I wondered what she was doing in this bar if not drinking. I made a joke, just trying to get out of the rain, too. What rain? She responded in deadpan. I couldn't tell if she was joking or not. There were other odd things about her, though. At one point, I mentioned how I had lived on an American military base in Japan, and she spoke at length and in detail about the initial American occupation of Japan following WW2. The way she spoke about it, the descriptions, she knew things that meant she had to have either been over 100 years old or an expert historian in her field. I shook my head. I knew she was older than me, though from certain directions she occasionally looked a bit younger, but she couldn't be that old. The most likely explanation was she had either a love of history or an older family member who had experienced those events and passed the story down. I asked her if she had any family in Japan, and she told me that she had once had a husband. She recalled how she had slaved away on the farm while he was away at war, but he had never trusted her. He had been a paranoid man and had come to believe with every fiber of his being that she was cheating on him with their hired farmhand. The way she talked about their home, her description of the paddy fields, and the way the sun shined down on the water, it sounded like a story out of another time, centuries ago. Time became fluid. My mind wandered to thoughts of feudal Japan and the wars between different samurai houses. As my vision drew further and further into the black holes of her eyes, it could have just as easily been happening then as in this exact instant. I could hear screams, blood, 100 years of blood and rage and retribution. There could be no justice except in death. Suddenly, I snapped back to reality. Her eyes glinted. I almost felt like she was smiling under the mask. She asked me if I would like to go outside with her. Her voice was like a whisper and nails on a chalkboard. I stood and followed her slowly out the back door of the bar. I couldn't feel my legs, and I realized they had fallen asleep. Her footsteps were heavy, though her movements were like she was gliding. For a moment I swore she was looking at me with hate through her eyes. When I woke up, I was standing beside her in the alley. My back was against the bricks of the wall as she stood before me. Rain streamed down from a metal overhang, and puddles covered the cracked pavement. We were beside the garbage cans at the back exit to the bar. Something about her screamed at me the image of a predator. "Do you think I'm beautiful?" she repeated. I laughed nervously. "I do," I responded. I watched as she removed her face mask. In the light, I could see her more clearly. Her pupils were tiny, hateful black pinpricks. She was as pale as a corpse. The wet hair clung to her, dripping. The mask came down after an eternity. Each second went on for hours until I finally saw the cracked porcelain of her face. Her blood-red lips were far wider than any human's, and she had far too many teeth. I realized she had been cut from ear to ear by a blade. Her teeth and jaw were exposed through her cheeks. I watched as she pulled a massive pair of scissors from her coat pocket. They were by far the largest pair of scissors I had ever seen. Had she had those the whole time? Was this what had done this to her? Was she about to do the same to me? Something had gone horribly wrong. Like a punch to the face, I remembered. I remembered stories I had heard as a child living in Japan. Campfire tales, ghost stories told at sleepovers and on internet message boards. The slit-mouthed lady. In the 1970s, there had been such a panic about stories of the slit-mouthed woman that teachers in Nagasaki began walking their students home for fear she would attack them on their routes back from school. But she was an urban legend, not reality. There were many versions of the story. Though it had started in Japan, over time the story spread to Korea and other Asian nations. In older folklore, she was the adulterous wife of a samurai, though in another story, she was his mistress. Either way, he had mutilated her in a rage. But she had returned, hadn't she? Disguised with a fan she held below her eyes, she had returned to exact vengeance. In more recent stories, she was horribly disfigured in a dental surgery gone wrong, and she wore a medical mask to hide her injuries. In another, she was a stalker of children who police chased into traffic, resulting in her facial injury. In the 90s, she was a victim of botched plastic surgery. In others still, she was a model, carved up by her jealous rival. She killed others with a knife or a sickle or, yes, even a pair of scissors. She couldn't exist. She was a metaphor, a bedtime story to scare children, but looking at her, I could tell that somehow every one of these stories could exist simultaneously. She lived in the whispers and nightmares, in the backs of throats that held back from saying her name. She was in the school bathrooms and locker rooms, following behind on the dark streets, just out of view on a late-night walk home, a stranger stopping you on a road through the forest late at night. And yes, she was there in the backs of alleys, in the back of every alley. She was in this alley, blocking the way out, holding a blade to me, blocking my escape. No way out, trapped like a cornered animal. Blood lips, black eyes, long hair, the bloody scissors. No escape. Her words tumbled out like 1,000 spiders from between her lips. Her voice was a croaking death rattle. Do you think I'm beautiful? This is what it feels like to be a ghost story. I had left the ordered world behind. Truth had walked out the door, and sensation had taken a wheel. All I wanted was to go back. I struggled to focus instead of giving in to the urge to scream. She glided the scissors like a caress across my face. There was nowhere I could run. She had me trapped. How did the legends say you could escape her wrath? Average. Her eyes narrowed. She stared with confusion. Her scissor-wielding hand lowered slightly as she faltered. I took my chance and I ran. I ran out of the alley, and then I ran some more. I didn't look back. I ran until I was out of breath, and I kept running until I couldn't stand. I haven't been back to that area since. I know, though, that it doesn't matter. Her legend has spread now. I know she's out there, part of the crowd, able to hide amongst us. She's here, and wherever a version of her story is told, she will be there, ready to exact a bloody vengeance. I've started to wonder if it was all some kind of waking dream, but I don't think it would matter if it was. When I close my eyes, I can still see her. At night, I lie awake, facing the wall, terrified that if I turn around, I'll see her standing in the corner or at the foot of my bed. Terrified that she'll be there smiling with that cracked porcelain grin. I've been careful not to speak of her to anyone until now, to keep her story from being told wherever I can. I realize now that it's futile. Maybe if I spread her legend, I can keep her away. Maybe by telling you all, I can spread her out enough to improve my chances. Just know that if a woman like the one I described ever approaches you on your path, get out of there before she has a chance to show you her face. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.